Hello, my name is Stacey Samoy, and I'm someone who transitioned from a non-technical background to a technical background, specifically data analytics. And within 3 years, I was able to go from an entry-level data analyst to senior data analyst, and I'm currently a strategy and analytics lead. And in this particular video, we're going to be answering like, if I was to start all over again, how would I do it? Like, how would I journey into becoming a data analyst? And if I'm being honest, I wouldn't change much. Like, the main thing I would change is just how much time I spend in each phase of learning. Because one thing I kind of overdid was I was watching every other tutorial. I was trying to take up as many certifications as possible. I was building all these projects. I was doing everything, but actually putting myself out there and starting to look for opportunities. And opportunities could come in many ways. So whether it's freelancing, an actual job, consulting, like I did everything but that. So yeah, in this video, I'm just going to answer that question, and of course, just like give a cautionary tale of like what to not do and what to do more of. But I want to make this like very relevant and very like, yeah, very relevant to like what a data analyst actually does. Like a data analyst who's actually in the industry now, like what does a data analyst actually do? And that's why I'm going to take time to firstly just explain like what does a data analyst actually do. So I'm going to explain it like very briefly. But if this is like something you're interested in, feel free to like stay tuned by subscribing, turning on the notification, because this would be a topic that I would cover in detail in its own video. But yeah, let's get into it. So like, what does a data analyst actually do? So a data analyst just basically guides decision making. Yeah. So if something is not going as expected or is going as expected, but we want to like optimize and like go to the next level, you as a data analyst would be the person who's guiding the strategic direction that the organization would take. So let's say it's a scenario where you work for like store, yeah, and you guys are used to getting like 1,000 inquiries. So let's say 10,000 inquiries month over month, yeah. And then in a certain month, that inquiry drops. And the following month, the same thing happens. So you go from having an organization that gets 10,000 inquiries, which usually leads to like 1,000 sales, to getting 1,000 inquiries, which is leading to 100 sales. So you see, that's problematic because when you're getting 10,000 inquiries and they're converting to 1,000 sales, that essentially means if each customer on average brings in, let's say, 100 Bob Kenya shillings or 100 USD, that would mean you guys were working with what? That's 100,000 USD or Kenya shillings. So I'm just going to use Kenya shillings going forward. Yeah. So that means you're working with 100,000 Kenya shillings. And maybe that's essentially what you need to be able to cover for various expenses and costs. And then you're left with some profit for the business. But if you come into a scenario where now you're only making 500 sales or 100 sales, that's very problematic because it even puts you at risk in terms of like, can you actually essentially cover your costs? Can you essentially cover your what is it called? Can you essentially cover your expenses, pay your employees, buy your raw material, etc.? Probably not. So people will have all these hypotheses, people close to the problem, whether it's like the CEO or the operations manager or the product people, they would have all these hypotheses, and most of them would actually make sense, yeah. And gone are the days where I would guess through like what's the best decision or strategy or direction to take. Like now we have data, now we have you as soon to be data analysts who would essentially guide this group of people in terms of like, okay, you guys probably think like the reason why this conversion has dipped, like we're seeing less sales month over month, is because, oh, we changed our product, or because we changed our logo, or we stopped producing this particular product in a certain color. Like we'd have all these hypotheses, and maybe people feel very strongly it's because we increase prices, but maybe it's not because we increase prices, and then someone makes the decision to go and reduce the prices, which would mean you're losing even more revenue for nothing. So you as a data analyst, that's why you come in, you go, you take all these hypotheses and you test them, and you test them using data that you need to source, data that you need to clean, data that you need to be model, that you need to model, data that you need to get into a form where like you can easily go into it and answer specific questions. And when you answer these questions, you ideally need to organize your data in a way that is easy for like both technical and non-technical consumers to actually just take in this data, take in this information, and be able to understand like what are you trying to communicate? What are you trying to essentially say is the main problem? So you see everything I've just mentioned in terms of like you need to find this data, source this data. I mean, you need to find this data which is sourcing the data. You need to clean it, you need to model it, you need to put it in a structure that is just easy to be able to answer your questions. These are things that tools like Excel, tools like SQL can help you do. You also need to take this data and be able to put it in a form that it's easy for like both a non-technical or technical person is able to really consume and understand, so this is the insight. So essentially this is what is happening and this is the recommendation on what we could potentially do. And what's the best way to do this? Visualization. Visualizations can come in very many forms. It could be a table, it could be a bar chart, it could be a line graph. Like there are so many ways to visualize data. And we will not get into the specifics of like there's so many ways to visualize data, but it's just I'm just going to talk about like what steps do you need to take to just get there, to become that data analyst who's able to answer questions that guide like strategic decisions that businesses take. And I would also like to say the reverse is true. You could also be working for a company that is thriving, an organization that is doing so well, and you guys are just challenging yourself, what is next? How do we times 10 our revenue? How do we drive more impact? How do we get into more contact with like our customers? How do we really drive value for them, you know? And you could go into the data and you discover something like, oh, customers are always asking about this particular product, but we don't have it. So if we introduce this particular product, for sure, that is like a easy, low-hanging fruit source of revenue for the organization. But for you to be able to do that, there are certain things you need to do before and essentially just journey towards becoming a data analyst. So in this journey towards becoming a data analyst, what are the things that I recommend you're keen on making sure you understand? Yeah. So there are going to be 6 things that I'm going to cover. So the first 3 are going to be the 3 technical skills that I recommend you really spend a good part of your early days, like your early days journeying towards becoming a data analyst, really zoning into. Then I'm also going to talk about like taking time, just take a step back and really identifying your unfair advantage and just thinking through how can you use your unfair advantage to help you land your first data role? Yeah. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is like, what is the industry looking for? This is coming from someone who actually leads a very high performing team. And I hired my current team and journeyed with them right from when they joined my team as junior data analyst. And yeah, when is the right time to actually start applying for these roles? Yeah. Which was like the biggest thing that I kind of slept on. But yeah, guys, let's get into it. So let's start with the 3 technical skills that I talked about. So there's Excel, there's Google Sheets, sorry, Excel/Google Sheets, actually, yes. And then there's SQL, and then we have a data visualization tool. So we have a number of profiles here, different profiles of people who could be watching this video, yeah? So number one, you're someone who's like me. You're from a non-technical background, but you probably worked with things like Google Sheets and Excel before. So you do have some basic understanding of like, you could use a pivot table, you can do some aggregations on Excel, you can probably use like your VLOOKUP or not. Honestly, you don't have to be familiar with all these functions that I'm mentioning. Yeah, you don't, honestly, as long as you're just comfortable with your Excel, you understand what Excel or Google Sheet does. Yeah, whether it's from aggregation to pivot table, you can do some basic data visualization. Like my recommendation to you is go straight to SQL. Like challenge yourself to begin your data analytics journey with SQL. But if you're someone who like you're new to this field and you probably heard of Google Sheet or Excel, or you've not heard about it, or if you have heard about it, you've never used it before, start from there. So I always recommend starting with like a Google Sheet or Excel. They essentially do the same, so just pick one. Like the most user-friendly immediate one that you could jump on is like Google Sheet, for as long as you have an email. And yeah, for as long as you have an email, you can just search Google Sheet, get access to it, and start doing some practice. Yeah. So just learn how to do basic things like creating a pivot table, doing some aggregation, try and clean your data over there, do some dashboarding over there. Like it will all like that's essentially it. The only source I would add to it is practice project-based learning. So get a data set from Kaggle or whichever website that you prefer. Yeah. in order to get this data set from Kaggle, and preferably a data set in like a topic that you're interested in. So if you're someone who's more interested in finance like me, well and good, look for a finance data set. If you're interested in like the marketing side of things or the medical side of things, pick a data set in the domain that you're interested in. And just go into Google Sheet and challenge yourself to answer a question. So maybe you decided to pick a data set that is talking about like the financial state of like a various countries, and you just want to get a sense of like, okay, so for countries located in like East Africa, what is the average revenue, or rather average income brought in by gender? What is the average income brought in by like the various countries in East Africa by various location in a particular country? Like that's essentially it. But if you don't know where to start from, don't worry. I've got you. So you just go to my channel, you can go to the playlist, and I have a good number of projects that cover Excel. Yeah. And you can be able to just pick one of those projects and just like practice along those projects. But yes, practice with those projects, but I recommend project-based learning in two phases. Following along projects that I already built, like what I have in my channel, yeah. And also just picking a data set and just challenging yourself to build something from scratch, because it will really test your critical thinking. It will really test like how well do you understand various concepts, how well do you understand like what data analytics is all about. So please, please, please make sure to approach project-based learning from both fronts. Yeah. Then the next thing that I'd want you to jump on is SQL. Yeah. For those of you who've been here long enough, you could dare call me Mama SQL or Mama SQL, because you know my channel predominantly covers SQL as at now. So of course, as you can see, we've now started doing sit-down videos. We also have projects in like Power BI, and we have projects in Tableau, we have projects in Excel. So yes, as much as my channel predominantly covers SQL, we are also expanding. Yeah. So the next thing is SQL. And SQL, let's segment it into three: basic SQL, intermediate SQL, and complex SQL. At this point of your learning stage, stick to basic and intermediate. Honestly, those two are enough. Yeah, those two are enough. So under basic, you're going to do things like select from where. So being able to just pull blanket data from like a table, you know. Then the next thing that I want you to do is like focus on intermediate SQL. So this is where you learn about group by aggregate function, having where clause. I'm not sure whether where clause sits in basic or intermediate, but but essentially what I'm saying is learn both basic and intermediate SQL. And honestly, with those two, you're good to go. So the only thing I'd recommend is, since they like, unlike Excel / Google Sheet, which is something that someone who's from whatever background is likely to have interacted with it at some point. SQL is not something that you find like someone in marketing or someone who's in like operations like using SQL, but you'll find them using Excel. Yeah. So for SQL, I recommend you first just take a run through on like these various concepts that are in both basic and intermediate. And again, I got you. So if you go to my channel, you can go to the playlist section. Like there's a whole playlist with like various SQL concept, and I ordered it from like basic to intermediate. So feel free to just follow along, code along with those tutorials. Yeah. And then you guessed it, project-based learning still need to be applied. So the next thing that I also recommend is to just go into my channel again. You can find various SQL projects there. Again, go to the playlist and you just find like SQL projects, and feel free to like code along with me. But as I will always say, approach project-based learning from two fronts. So from the front of like coding along with someone, but also just picking a data set and really challenging yourself to really see, like, have I understood this concept? Like, yes, I've learned about group by, yes, I've learned about having clause, where clause, I've learned about select from, I've learned about limit, but do I know how to use these things? Do I know how to bring them together? That is what project-based learning on the front of just picking a data set and trying to generate a project from scratch will do for you. And these projects that you're doing, this project-based learning that you're doing, is essentially what will come together and be your portfolio. So your portfolio is essentially like various projects that you've already done that you can put in your CV and just show your employer that I am actually like familiar with the concept of like data analytics. I'm able to clean data. I'm able to query data. Yeah. So using SQL, you're able to do some dashboarding. You're able to answer questions using various tools. So that's essentially it. That's how you build your portfolio. And once you have those two, I could dare challenge you to actually start looking for jobs here and there. But before you go like full blown looking for a job, the third thing that I would recommend you do is learn a data visualization tool. And at this point in in your journey. Like this whole debate of, oh, should I learn Power BI? Oh, should I learn Tableau? Like now just pick one and go for it. So let's say you decide to you pick Power BI because Power BI is like a Microsoft product, and you've probably already been doing what is it called? Maybe you're doing your SQL you practice your SQL on MySQL, which I think is also a Microsoft product, and then you're doing Excel, which is a Microsoft product. So you just said, let's keep it Microsoft here, and you go with Power BI. Yeah. So just learn. Just learn. Because one thing you'll realize as you go on is like once you become like fairly good at Power BI, honestly, even if it's just like intermediate, like when you transition to Tableau, those tools are not very different. The syntax might change a bit, the view of the tool might change a bit, but in terms of like what they do, they are essentially the same. Yeah. So pick one and go for it. So let's say you decide to go with Power BI in this case. Again, do some basic get some basic tutorials here and try and get some basic tutorials here and there, try and build, like do some data cleaning, do some data modeling, build some dashboards. But in my case, honestly, I went direct to building a project because there's really nothing new you're learning, because you probably learned about how to clean your data, structure your data in a certain way, sort your data in a certain way using either SQL or Excel. So you still learn the same concepts, but you just get to do it in Power BI or Tableau. So for me, I'd be like, go directly into like getting a tutorial or getting a project and try and build something in Power BI or Tableau if that's what you decided to go with. And as usual, you can go to my playlist. I do have projects that actually bring it all together. So just show you how you can jump from Excel to Power BI and finally from Excel to SQL and finally to Power BI for dashboarding. And it essentially just gives you a taste of like, how would you actually use this tool if you are actually like a real data analyst in the industry. And essentially, honestly, that's it. And at this point, the thing that I just want to talk about is like, are you ready to start applying for roles? Yes. You've already done some Excel, you've done some SQL, you've done some Power BI, you've done project-based learning, you've built projects. Those are projects that you put into your portfolio, and that is the portfolio you start using to apply for roles. Again, CV writing for like a beginner data analyst is something that I will eventually talk about. So like if you have the experience, how do you leverage the experience that you already have? How do you leverage the project that you've built to just help you land that data role? That's something that I'm going to talk about in detail later on later in the near future, of course, in like the immediate to near future. So if that's something you're interested in, please do feel free to subscribe and even turn on the notifications so that you're notified when that particular video comes on. But back to this video, you're ready. Start applying, and you'll notice when it came to SQL, I talked about two things. Yeah. So just basic and intermediate. That is enough. Speaking as someone who's actually a hiring manager, as someone who's leading a high performing data analytics team, when I was hiring, I was keen to just look for someone whose critical thinking is very strong. You have some understanding of the domain that I'm hiring for. And then lastly, some basic to intermediate SQL. You're able to do a select from where you're able to do some aggregation. You know how to use group by etc. Honestly, once you know that, I'm good. I'm good. The rest of the things we can learn as we go. And by the time you've been able to just get yourself to that point and you know how to do these things, I know you'll be able to challenge yourself to keep learning like the more complex stuff. And even with the more complex stuff, let's use an example of like our Windows function. Yeah. A Windows function is a complex SQL. It's a complex SQL concept, and it's something that is essentially just built off group by and aggregating. So if you know how to aggregate, if you know how to use the group by clause, like my friend, when you get to the point of like, oh, you want to learn what Windows function is all about, you'll be able to get it because it builds off that. And essentially, that is it. Like the three things, your Excel, your SQL, your data visualization tool, you're ready to start putting yourself out there. You're ready to start applying, don't overstress. And even as you keep on applying, it's also a whole other journey. Yeah. So as you keep on applying, you can also keep learning these other things. So whether it's like zoning in a certain domain, whether it's zoning in terms of like you really want to learn more complex SQL, zoning in terms of like you really need to continue like strengthening your Power BI. But with what you have, you can essentially demonstrate that you know how to do data cleaning, data modeling, whether you're going to do it on Power BI or you focused on learning it on SQL and then you transform your data from SQL to Power BI and that's where you do your dashboarding. My friend, you're good to go. That is enough. Do not make the mistake I made of like really looking to keep on learning and learning and learning. Like I remember by the time I was applying for my first data role, I actually knew how to code in Python, which I don't regret because it still came through for me. But in real sense, my first ever job, I was just on SQL and data visualization, SQL and data visualization, and occasionally I would jump on like Google Sheets, yeah. So learn from someone who's actually been who's actually in the industry and has been in the industry for over 3 years. And essentially from like the first points, I believe we've covered the technical tools, we've covered what is the industry looking for, which as I mentioned, your critical thinking, some basic SQL, you're good to go. And something else that I also do whenever I'm testing people, I test for both SQL and Excel. And that's because I acknowledge that most people might be familiar with Excel, especially like in the location that I am in. Again, yeah, we'll get more into detail about that in terms of like, okay, so now you've learned all these basic things. How do I actually keep on zoning into the thing that I've identified in the region? Like the location that I'm in, this is actually what is needed. Yeah. But again, if that's something you're interested in, subscribe, turn on notification, we'll get there. But in this case, so personally, as a hiring manager, what I do is I zone into like, I look at like how is your Excel and how is your SQL. So if your SQL is fair, and I can see that you can do more complex thing on like Google Sheet or Excel, and I'm like, okay, this is transferable as long as you kind of have a high level understanding of SQL. So like your basic skills are there, your intermediate is somewhere preferably there, and your Google Sheet is like really good. I know we can easily transfer the skills. This time I'm usually not worried. Like we'll cover for like any gaps during onboarding. And I'm saying like this is all going to tell you that you're ready. You're ready. Stop taking course after course, stop watching tutorial after tutorial, stop building project after project, or rather continue building project after project and doing those courses after courses and watching tutorial after tutorial, but do it as you also put yourself out there in terms of like looking for an opportunity. And yeah, the thing that I'm going to close with is your unfair advantage. Zone into your unfair advantage. So the irony with my unfair advantage was the fact that I was from an untechnical background, which was my biggest blocker, but also my unfair advantage, which essentially meant I was really good at something. Like I'm someone who's from business finance, and that means like I was like my business understanding, my financial knowledge was very strong. So even when I was looking for like data analytics role, I was very particular in terms of like I'm only looking for data roles that sit within finance or departments that are adjacent to finance. So whether it was data analyst in literally finance, data analyst in operations, data analyst in credit risk, that is what I was looking for. And I actually did end up landing a role as a data analyst in like the larger operations, but specifically in credit risk. And what was actually interesting about this journey is I made the decision to intentionally start looking for a data role and a data role in finance sometime in 2022, like yeah, early 2022, maybe like Jan, Feb there. And I kid you not, 4 to 6 months later, by early July, July 4th, I had already started my role. So that means I got my offer sometime in June. Yeah. And yeah, like just I zoned into my added advantage, which I think was a big thing because the parts where the technical skills were not really coming through for me, the domain knowledge compensated for that. So it worked for me, and I think it can work for you. And my added advantage, my unfair advantage rather, is like that domain knowledge that I was very good at. But I challenge you to really take a step back and try and understand what is your unfair advantage. So if you're someone who actually studied like a technical degree and you're looking to become a data analyst, maybe you did computer science, maybe you did business information or something, yeah. So you're more technically inclined. You could easily apply for roles that are more like they're data roles, but they're more technically. So whether it leans towards data engineering, whether it leans towards AI, whether it leans towards automation, like this role should like more naturally come to you because you're already familiar with engineering concepts. Not to say someone who's from like non-technical background like me would not also be able to learn this role, but this is just my advice to you in terms of like my experience. How can you use your unfair advantage to get you there? Like I started off in credit risk, but I've done a lot. I've been part of like growth and marketing teams and just been like a thought partner there in terms of like what strategic decisions should we make. I've done pricing analytics, I've worked with product, I've worked with engineering, I've been part of projects that are doing a lot of like automation, building AI agent, meaning building machine learning models. Like I have a bunch of experience around, but it first needed me to get into the field, and I was able to get into that field thanks to my unfair advantage, which was the fact that I was very knowledgeable in a particular field, and I really did take advantage of that. And thanks to that, I am where I am. But yeah, guys, this was really nice. I am really looking forward to like having more sit down videos like this. And if there are any particular things that you want to hear me talk about, do let me know down in the comment section. So I've already told you I'm going to be talking about like what does a data analyst actually do. We'll also have another video just talking about various types of data analysts. So like if you're a data analyst who's interested in product, a data analyst in engineering, a data analyst who sits in finance, a data analyst who sits in operations, which is kind of where I sit right now, a data analyst who's interested in like pricing analytics, like what are these various type of data analysts? What do they do, and which one do you, and from that I'm just hoping you're able to pick like which profile is more inclined to you. We're going to talk about like a lot, right? From, as I've mentioned, what does a data analyst actually do, the different types of data analysts, just sharing my journey. So like I've given at a high level, like how I would do it if I was to do it again. But when it comes to like learning, how would I actually recommend you learn? Bootcamp versus self-taught versus actually doing a formal data degree or technical degree, which I have attempted. I've actually done 2 semesters out of 6 of a master's degree, but it was not quite aligning in terms of like the level of flexibility I needed to like be able to do everything else that's going on in my life. So just taking you guys through that journey and just hoping that at the end of it all, you're able to pick like insights that will just guide your journey and you're able to land to wherever you want to be in like the smoothest way possible. And then something else that I'm also like really keen to introduce in this channel and also talk about is just my journey from entry level to senior data analyst, and like senior data analyst individual contributor versus senior data analyst who's a manager and now a strategy and analytics lead. How was that transition, like coming from like an individual contributor to someone who's like managing a team, building a team, growing a team? Like what are some of the things that I wish someone told me before doing that transition? Like I'm really excited to share a lot about my experience, right from the fact that I do acknowledge my journey is a unique one. Literally something that I've been told by so many people, like coming from an non-technical background and being able to grow all the way to lead, lead although to lead. So I'm strategy and analytics lead. So all the way to lead in less than 3 years. It is a very unique journey. And I'd like to share with you guys like what did I do? What did I actually zone into to get there, to get here, not there, here, because we are here. So yeah, if that's something that you're interested in, stay tuned. And then one other thing about myself that I also like to tell you is like I do have a 9 to 5, but I've also done consultancy. I've done a bit of freelancing, but from a point of like someone who needs something, like a mutual friend knows someone who needs something, like, oh yeah, I know someone who can help you with that card data thing, blah, blah, blah. So also just sharing my experience and like my thoughts about it. So like various ways to generate income as a data analyst, right? From like having a 9 to 5 to consultancy, to freelancing, to content creation, etc. If these are all topics that you're interested in, stay tuned, people. Like I plan to bring for you guys like a lot, like bringing it all here, laying it all down, and just considering the fact that I am someone in the data field who is actually based in East Africa. Like I work across East Africa, yeah, so not limited to one country. Though of course, I mean one place, but yeah, just as someone who is in who works in East Africa, I'm really keen and like passionate about sharing my journey with other people who relate more to my story, and just like, guys, if I got here, you could get here too. So yeah, I can talk. I think you can tell I love talking, but let's call it a video for now. See you in the next one.